This is the custom plugin portal talk. My name is Ethan Hall. I work at LinkedIn. And before we get going, you have the obligatory introducing yourself slide. I'm a staff software engineer at LinkedIn. I've been there for 2 years and about 6 months. Tech lead on the Gradle Foundation. I do a lot of things related to build, making developers happy, making them so they can figure out things themselves. And when I'm not doing that, I also go scuba diving. So if you don't like this talk, you want to talk to me, and you go scuba diving, we can talk about fun trips. So before we get going, you're probably, why do we want a custom plugin portal? For LinkedIn, we have probably 50 to 100 plugins, depending on who you ask and how you search for it, at different versions. It's a lot of plugins. It makes it really hard to know what's available. 2 days ago, I got a Slack message from someone asking, what plugins do we have? And I'm like, well, I can give you an AQL query you can run against Artifactory to tell them off to you, but I don't have a list of them all for you. And so it becomes this kind of tribal knowledge. Some people have these plugins, some people have these other ones. It's really hard to know what's available to everyone to use. And there's some really cool APIs we get to use, and we'll show that in a little bit. I think they're nifty, and they let you do some pretty fun things with Gradle and kind of faking it out. This presentation's primarily focused on build masters, infrastructure people, and people that are curious about plugins, the how you use them, not necessarily how to write them. This is not going to talk about build performance. It's not going to talk about cacheability or any of the new fancy things that are coming out with Gradle 4. But for people that have large infrastructure, I think this is a useful topic. And before we get into the actual implementation of possible different plugin portals, how you want to do them, we're going to go through some quick recap of how you can define plugins. So the first is build source. This is the one that lives alongside your project. It's in the build source directory. It has its own build. It executes every time when you run your build. So if you do this, you're paying a penalty with every build to validate that the source code's up to date, the classes are correct. So it makes builds a little bit slower. It does, however, have the perk of you can say, I don't need to make this plugin generic. I know exactly what's needed to do, and I'll just do that exact thing. So it's easier to write. It doesn't involve publishing the Artifactory or Nexus, or anything like that. You can just put it right in your build. But it also encourages a lot of copy-paste code. So if you have one project that has this nifty plugin, someone's going to go copy it into their project, it's going to have this nifty plugin, and then it's just going to devolve into everyone has a slightly different copy of this nifty plugin as time goes on and bug fixes come. So it's useful for small projects, small teams, but as it gets bigger, it's harder to maintain. And that's where you go to buildscript. It's really handy because it's basically the same mechanism that you would use in a Gradle build. You define your repositories, you define your dependencies. It's just in this build script closure. It's nice. You can reuse a lot. So you have to think about reusability versus just using it and writing it for your specific project. But it ends up giving a lot of boilerplate code. You could probably get rid of it with an apply from URL. We'll talk about some of that in a little bit, but it ends up being messy. If you apply from a URL, though, you're going to be applying every one of your plugins to every build that's getting it, so it's going to be slower. If it has to resolve 40 jars every time the build runs, it'll be slower. You probably don't want that. And the plugins, the last nifty bit, is the newer API. I think it came out with Gradle 2.2. It's how you probably use the Gradle plugin portal today. You can, with the plugin portal, you don't have to do anything. With the open source one, it just works out of the box. In the settings at Gradle, you can configure different things. So you can say, I've got these plugins that are in this repository, go apply them here. Kind of nifty. It lets you pull your plugins out and your users can define things for themselves. And it also makes it where you don't have to put all the jars in your class path at once. So you can say, here are all the plugins, I know where to get them all, but I'm not going to load them up every time. Every plugin or every project is going to load their own plugins up, what they need. But every settings.gradle file would require a apply from URL or apply from block. It would require a block of configuration, or you can do an apply from URL to make it so it's consistent across the world, depending on how you want to do this. So recap, build script is nice for one project, build source is nice for one project, build script is nice for a lot of projects. Plugins is the newer way to do things. and lets you interact with the public Gradle plugin portal. So let's get into some ways that you could do this. So I'm going to show you 2 different versions of this. We're going to go through 2 examples for the first one. First one, you define everything in your settings at Gradle. You can conglomerate this all into a apply from and then a URL that's hosted somewhere else so that you can do it once and everyone can benefit. So as things update and change, you don't have to worry about it. So the first example is just a project that contains other Gradle plugins. Here's the link to GitHub if you would like to go look at it in the future. I've pulled an excerpt from the build.gradle here. You'll see plugins, and then I'm applying the buildscan plugin, yay buildscan, Kotlin, bin tray, and then I've got a few plugins that I've written for myself. You'll notice here they've got something a little bit different, this latest, we'll talk about in a bit. But settings at Gradle is a little bit complicated. So I'm applying the Gradle plugin portal so I can get all the open source ones. I'm defining a Maven URL so I can get my plugins I've published to bin tray. And then I'm doing this weird resolution strategy thing. This is the newer API I came up with Gradle 3.4, I believe. It lets you change where plugins come from, where you're getting them. This is how we're going to actually implement a plugin portal. So you'll see on, oh, you can see that, cool. You'll see here, I'm hitting an endpoint. It's giving me some JSON back. I'm parsing it, and I'm using this key, a key in it, latest. So I'm giving it latest, so I'm getting the latest version back, and I'm giving version, so it gives me a version number, which is what Maven connects to, so it can just resolve it correctly. So I brought up the latest thing. Gradle doesn't support, currently, the ability to do dynamic resolution in the plugins section. You have to give it a specific version every time. Kind of painful if you have a bunch of internal plugins that are always iterating going forward to go and update every project from the past. So there's a service I wrote that gives me latest versions of things. It's a version catalog. If we want to talk about that in the future, come talk to me. We'd be happy to. Not the topic of this talk. So, but what it does is say, given the latest, given the project and I'm with the latest version, it gives me the actual version number that would be in Maven. So I take that version, I say, okay, I know I told you to use the latest, but really latest means this version number. And then Gradle will, under the hood, go pull the right artifact and use it for me. Another thing that you probably may have noticed, may have not, is the apply false blocks throughout this whole thing. Here's a documentation link about why you have to do it. Basically, if you try to do plugins on Sibling Projects that have the same thing, Gradle will throw an exception at you. And instead of trying to scatter my plugins everywhere throughout it, I can just say, here are all my plugins defined at the top. They all get put on the class path for the Gradle. And then you can just do apply plugin and then the name later on. Solves that problem, and it's a nifty place to keep all the stuff. So my home projects are fine and dandy, and I think they're great. However, they're not a big company's project. So let's take a look at LinkedIn's Android app. So here is our section of the plugins that we would use. It's a little bit longer. We've got a lot more plugins being applied. You probably noticed that everything's appended with LI due to convention, not for any specific reason, because everything is LI. No? All right. Our settings at Gradle is a little bit different. Here we're going to say, before, in the previous example, we were using the Maven publish where you would get the marker POM published alongside your project and then would be able to resolve it dynamically. We don't have that, especially for older plugins. We don't have that already done. And I don't really want to go through and backport all that through. So instead, we all know where, or I all know, and then the development team that's working on this knows where all the plugins live in Maven, or their coordinates. So we've basically done a map from plugin ID to Maven group name. I'm not including version here because the user is going to specify the version they want to use, so that I don't have to go keep updating this map for forever. So basically you see map, plugin name, groups. I've omitted a bunch of stuff because readability and slides, but we'll look at it live and we'll do some demos in a bit. And then I look it up in the map, I append the colon and append the version that you specified, And then Gradle, when it does the resolution, will go pull that artifact from Artifactory, put it on the class path, and magic will happen. But that's kind of kludgy. It's hard to maintain. If every time a new plugin came out, we had to go update a list and all the things so people knew what to do, it would be mass chaos. Everyone would have different versions. And if we want to do something like changing where it's published, maybe a plugin's moved, now you have to do, okay, if it's less than this version, it goes here. If it's greater than this version, go there. Kind of becomes a maintenance nightmare. And it doesn't really help my visibility. I don't know what plugins are available. I just know here are all these jars that have it, and maybe if people have been good, they put it into the artifact, or they put it in there so I can see it. They're probably not good. They've probably forgotten it, and so we don't have a full list. And one of the things that a lot of people come, at least to me, about is documentation. Like, cool, I've got this plugin. Where do I find the documentation? I'm like, go read the source code. Maybe they've got something in their docs about it. Wiki search, maybe. So Gradle's public portal has a documentation link. It sends you to the GitHub README so that you can put it all there and it's easy to find. So if we make a real portal that's a service, it should be able to provide this information to us. And as we talked about, the public portal has a lot of these nice features. However, it doesn't have two things that are really important for me as an enterprise. I'm not willing to publish my private plugins to a public source because I have custom things. I don't want to let that leak out. And I'm not willing to rely on a third-party service running in AWS that has known outages to cause my builds to fail. If I get called because AWS is out, I'm kind of screwed, right? I can't do anything to solve it. I just have to wait until AWS fixes themselves from S3, the S3 outage a few months ago. So I want something that I can deploy locally inside of my environment to make sure this works for me. And that's what I want. I want to be able to publish anything I want, internal, external, foos, bobs, jars, whatever. I want to be able to integrate with other systems. So I can say, at LinkedIn we have a deployment system where I can nominate versions. So maybe I don't want people to be able to use a version until I've said, it's stable, you can use it. And then a system can talk to me to say, okay, this version is now a stable one, go use it. So a lot of integration. If you have the dynamic version thing, if Gradle implements that in the future, one of the problems you'll run into is if I want to EOL or kill a version, I have to then go republish it under the next version number. It takes time, slow. If you have a service that can just remove that version entry, then it would stop working. And the one that we've written doesn't have a UI yet, but one could be easily added because I'm terrible at JavaScript and you don't want to see my JavaScript. So really what it comes down to is there's a few requirements. You've got a plugin name and a version. You want to map that to a coordinate in Artifactory, Maven, wherever. You want to be able to link to it optionally. You shouldn't require it, but if a team is proud of their work, you would think they would want a documentation link so that people can figure out what to do. And I want to be able to see all the plugins available and all the versions of those plugins available so I can pick what I need and I can inspect it to see how old are you. One other thing you need to do is be able to specify repositories. If you have, your own custom Artifactory instance or Nexus instance, you need to be able to know where to pull things from, right? Otherwise, you're going to be trying to pull from Maven Central, and that's just not going to work. So in this case, you can do something nifty. You can apply from a URL. This URL would get executed when Gradle runs, and it does a few things. It is a Gradle script, so it gets executed. It adds a repository, or it adds a few repositories depending on what you've defined, and then it applies a plugin. That plugin goes through and configures Gradle to look at where plugins are. So it looks at another resource from the service, and then we'll say, look it up here, oh, it's this coordinate. Look it up here, it's this coordinate. So it's kind of weird to describe, but we'll see it in action here in a minute. This is an example of what the script that comes from the service looks like. You just specify some repositories, you apply the latest, longer term, this should actually be a specific version versus plus, and you specify the host. This is done so that you can say, hey, I want to hit this specific instance, or I want to hit the CNAME, or I want to hit this Anycast IP. whatever URL it comes in as, it'll give it back to you. So you can be sticky bound to a specific instance if you want to. And then there's a bug in Gradle where you can't use IDs in the settings.gradle for some reason, so you have to give it the full class name. So it works. If you do something like this, you run into some operation concerns, right? If you're running a service that's part of your critical build path, it can't go down, otherwise your builds start failing. From what I've been able to tell, it doesn't really matter if it's stale data as long as it's available. So if you're missing one version for 5 minutes, users probably aren't going to be that impacted if the builds versus if the builds are just down, right? So throw up a few Nginx instances with the setting to always cache the response, and if it doesn't get a response from the service, give the cache value back. Works for us, especially when there's only 2 endpoints you're ever hitting. So it's always updating the cache. And right now, there's our pull request open there, 1944, that enables it so that if you run offline mode, right now, Gradle can't do apply from URLs at all. They fail because you can't connect to the internet. This does caching so that if you run an offline, it'll use the most recent value it used, and you can kind of continue your life. And so with all that little extra overhead, you get a central place to look up plugins, and you get a way to make your settings at Gradle simple, so you can do more things with it if you wanted to. So because I like live demos and I kind of hate myself, we're going to do some live demos. Try this. Cool. Can you guys see that in the back? Cool. So we're going to look at the settings at Gradle. I'm connected to my corporate VPN so I can access all these things. I hook up to the Artifactory instance at LinkedIn. Here we've got a map of maps so I can have different plugins mapping to a specific coordinate because we usually publish a bunch of plugins inside of a single jar. So I can enumerate all of them and look them up versus having to keep one list of a bunch of things that have this duplicated data. And then when Gradle's trying to resolve the plugins, it's going to hit this each plugin block. It's going to get called. It's going to get the details object. It's going to go get the ID's ID. I don't know why they're called ID and ID, but they are. And that is the string you tried to apply. So it would be com Gradle build scan. And then the details requested version is the version that you requested. So in this case, it's going to be 194, I believe. So I go grab the group name. I find it in this list. Go there, grab it from the list, and append the version number into it. So it runs, it knows where to find things. Too far down. So here's my plugins block, pretty simple. I'm just specifying all the versions. We'll do fun stuff. So if I run Gradle W tasks, as long as the gods are on my side right now, it'll run and succeed. Android projects are particularly long to do anything with, so if anyone knows a joke or two. So, fun times of configuring Gradle. Hey, it worked. Cool. I think my VPN connection is really bad, so it's really slow. So that's the one thing. So let's go to the newer way where you can actually use a service. Because I can't type, I've made a branch for myself. So here, instead of that big long block of disgusting code, I now have just a single line of apply from the URL. Before I can run this, I should probably start the service, right? Useful if it's running beforehand. So Spring Boot app, Java, Hibernate, standard stuff. All right, cool, it's running. And then I also need to seed some data into it. So I've got a bash script that does a bunch of curls. So if I were to go take this and curl it, said blob that you saw earlier. Right here, you see that we support, or the plugin portal supports expansions. So you can do localhost stuff if you need to. So at LinkedIn, we publish things into what we call local repo. It's on your home directory, so I should be able to go find my plugins in my home directory. So we do that. And then if I run my build again, so I haven't changed my build at Gradle at all. If I run my build again, it should do magic. And take another 38 seconds to run.
Which Gradle version are you running?
4.
What?
4. Yeah. I have a feeling this is related to my bad connection back to my network, probably.
That's definitely it.
So it's not a problem of Gradle 4. But it hasn't failed yet trying to do things. It's just going to take forever. While this runs. Terrible connection back home. All right. So these versions are still here, and they're kind of annoying, right? Who wants to put all these versions and every time they do a new plugin, have to go and do something with it? Do you guys? Do you want to go update this every time? No? Cool. So what the portal lets you do is it uses magic, and I can specify default. That'll go use the service to look it up. So if I which one was that? So this is the response JSON that comes back from the service with all the data. You see here I've got a default version specified. So what the plugin's going to do is it sees that you've used this keyword default, and it's going to actually use the 4 or 004 versus the string default as your version number. So you can then dynamically pick new versions. Makes it nice because then I can go kill versions if I want to. I can update them. I can roll out as I need to, and then I can roll back quickly. So I don't have to go through commits to do that. So kind of a handy feature. Let's see if that finished. But apparently I can't unzoom. Oh, I'm in the wrong one. That's why. So it finished after 2 minutes and 20 seconds. My connection's really bad. If I run the build environment command, hopefully it doesn't take nearly this long. Do you guys know what the build environment command is, or task is? So the build environment task is a task written that will just output the build script dependencies. So if you have a question about which plugin's loaded in which version, you can run this and it'll tell you the entire transitive graph for you. So it's like dependencies task for your build script. One caveat is you have to run it in all your sub-projects too, because it doesn't show the parent ones when it runs. So kind of a weird thing, but if you're doing weird build stuff anyways, you're probably used to weird stuff anyways. It hasn't failed yet, which is a good sign. But I'll come back to that. So I showed you the service a little bit, some of the responses to it. It has a link, got some nice things. You can deploy it, it's jar, you just run it like I did earlier. How many of you would actually want to use or see something like that to build off of it and probably extend? All right, handful, cool. So there's a GitHub project, almost. Almost. There will be in a second. assuming my internet works, which might not be true. Who doesn't just copy and paste that answer? Cool. There's now a public LinkedIn that has the source code for this. If you want to go look at it, it has some security in air quotes here. The username is user and the password is password. If you want to use this anywhere, I would highly recommend hooking it up into Spring Security and using LDAP or some other source of method of authentication. That's all done at the very highest level, so you can go easily drop it out and replace it with something else. So please don't deploy with a default password and username. At least change it to something else. If you have issues or questions about it or you want to talk about it, open issues, we can do stuff. But simple, quick presentation. You guys have any questions? Yeah.
Do you have any examples published that show how to, like what you showed in the settings on Gradle, how to use this custom mapping?
How to use the custom mapping, like
The custom plugin.
the GitHub README has one. Yep. Renee?
Do you gather kind of data how like when you search
No. We're in the process of migrating to something like this because we've got a whole bunch of legacy things. So we're having to do piecemeal upgrades. But it works for our big Android app. Anything? Yeah.
I think the only maybe issue I could envision with this is, let's say you publish a new version of a plugin and that introduces some sort of bug into the production code that you don't realize for like 3 weeks later or something. So going back in time to like troubleshoot, well, your build script says use the latest version, but how do you go back and like temporally go back and figure out what version was used to do that build? Because you're looking at like a kit,
Right.
you know that commit or that build number, but you can figure that out.
So the question is, how do you figure out what plugins were used for a specific build? Right? Right now, there isn't a way to do that, but with some auditing additions, you could do that. And you could make a query saying, what was the response at this time? Or we could also output that file somewhere if you wanted to. Cool? If no one else has questions, you guys can free and roam, give you some time back. If I'll be here and you can ask more stuff, come up here. Cool.